Yeah, I'd like to talk today about Max Glucksmann. He was a very influential recording producer as well as film producer. He owned 70 theaters in Uruguay and Argentina. And I'm going to show you an advertisement for the business that he took over, Casa La Paz. And this is from a Caras y Caretas magazine from September 3rd, 1910. And about January 3rd of 1914, there was a 3-page article about El Hogar del Film, the home of film. Here's a picture of Max Glucksmann just above my thumb there. And a picture of Enrique La Paz, who retired and sold Max. Max had worked for him for a few years. So I'm going to read the translation. We see other pictures of the office desk where Max sat and other aspects. Here we see the outside of the building. Very beautiful architecture. Buenos Aires was called the Paris of South America. I also want to mention that at least 3 people that owned Enrique Garcia guitars. I got 2 sitting in stock here, 1897 and 1907. I've already got videos on YouTube of those. They're great sounding. Max Glucksmann, also being the producer of Discos Nacional Odeon, he recorded Maria Luisa Nido doing duets with Miguel Ubet on her 1918 Enrique Garcia guitar. Agustin Barrios had a 1923 Enrique Garcia guitar. It was actually finished by Francisco Simplicio, who had worked since about 1919 for Enrique Garcia. And also Adolfo Luna in 1929 recorded a few songs. I've got one of those in my possession. And he used a 1904 Enrique Garcia that came into his possession about 1924. That guitar was the ex-collection of Francisco Tarraga. It was the first Garcia. There's also a 1906 number 74. The 1907 that I have is a number 81, just 7 guitars after Tarraga's second Taurus. So I want to read here the translation of the home of film in Buenos Aires, Caras y Caretas magazine of January 3rd, 1914. Without greater explications, the title says enough about the chronicle that everyone understands what we are going to be concerned with of the great colossus of cinematography, of Max Glucksmann and of the famous Casa La Paz. In whatever part of South America to speak of cinemas and films, the first that comes to mind is the name of Max, and in effect, since he has made in this country the first cinematic exhibition, we have always seen at the end of the film the suggestive sign, the only concessionaire, Casa La Paz, of Max Glucksmann. And in its accordance with the growing love of film, it has also augmented the popularity of Max Glucksmann and acquiring its well-cemented colossal importance of Casa La Paz. Therefore, we name the palace that today Glucksmann occupies in the calles Callao and Mitre, calles meaning streets in Spanish, the home of film, because in the Casa La Paz the cinema was born in South America when barely Pathé had initiated the great Pathé in its first films in Europe. If we wanted to establish a mathematical proportion to better express what Glucksmann represents in the matters of cinematography, we would say that Max is to South America what his representatives, Pathé Frères, Pathé Brothers, are to the world, and all that concurs by this irrefutable truth to the cinemas that have become so. I also should break away just for a second to mention that Hector Lucci, who passed away a few years ago, he was in his late 80s, might have even reached the age of 90. He was a film collector of cine mudo, silent movies made by Glucksmann. He had a huge collection. He was also a record collector, and he may probably have owned the flamenco cylinder that was done in June of 1900. The Spanish flamenco player was on the scene till the 1920s, and he was born 1876. I'm blanking out on his name right now. If we want, when I forget something, in a lot of cases I'll put the name in the text, so you can see that in the text box of this YouTube video. It's been many years since the French merchant Don Enrique Lepage modestly founded in the small location on Calle Bolivar a house of articles of photography that quickly acquired just renown for the aficionados and professionals of the art of daguerre, daguerre having invented photography or discovered it in 1837. Among the few employees that helped Lepage to sell plates, machines, and papers, it was distinguished by his affability, by its extraordinary vividness, and by its general conditions. A young lad, a boy almost, that has called as a vendor. The attention of many clients arrived at the house. This young boy was growing with the small business until he arrived, and then Glucksmann, with his self-starting spirit, with his clear vision for big business, and an able disciple of a very able maestro, gave the Casa Lepage new flights. Fixed orientations that have had the success to change without throwing out the old. This is such that it has edified and has progressed, has converted his house into a powerful organization without forgetting the ancient one, without carelessness of a moment that even constitutes a basic principle of the Casa Lepage. So we see, well, that in spite of these extraordinary flights that they learned to give to the section of cinematographers in film, it follows being in photography, which it always was, the popular house and popularized by excellence. Lepage was who brought the first phonograph and the first cinema and the first novelties in photography, and Glucksmann who gave them the impulse and the developments to a maximum that by an almost inconceivable grandiose result. Today his sale of records and phonographs reaches such numbers that if we are to be impressed by them, they might result in the difficulty to understand for the reader that isn't familiar with those things. But it's enough to say that if the cinematic films of Glucksmann are seen in all parts, the records, Odeon and Phonotypia, famous throughout the world for many years, are heard also by them, and those records are, among us, one of the great exclusivities that the Casa Lepage of Max Glucksmann possesses. Besides the modest house on the Calle Bolivar, the great annex of the Avenida de Mayo and the Calle Victoria has been established. An expansion was necessary that runs the pair with such a magnitude of the growing business, but not to abandon the old house that followed and continues where it was founded. A new one was established. They opened annexes in Montevideo, in Rosario, Santa Fe, Santiago, Chile, and finally the crown of this enlarging process occupying the palace that it proudly dominates. Now I'm reading this from Annotations to the History of the Classical Guitar, Volume 3. 4-volume series, weighs 21 pounds, $300, shipped worldwide, shipping included. To continue, besides Max, it is a very popular owner. Max is the very popular owner and impresario of the most notable theaters that for cinematic expositions have raised in Buenos Aires. El Palace Theater, since where it opened in its doors, the most select of our porteña society have congregated. The Petit Palace on the Plaza Libertad, the popular Cine Opera on the Calle Corrientes, and finally the colossal Electric Palace, which on the Calle La Valle gives it a salient note of grandioseness by its artistic face and by its extraordinary capacity, since it has seats for 2,000 without squeezing anyone uncomfortably. The salient characteristic of the Glucksmann Theater supports 70 of them. However, principally in the novelty of the films that it exhibits and in which, by being imported exclusively by him, they debut in his theaters, which, even when they pass after the innumerable business that as many in the city as in all of the interior of the country as in the rest of South American republics, are subsidiaries of Max Glucksmann, while they are representatives of Pathé Frères and of most of the important film factories of the whole world. Max Linder, Celestino, the famous Robinet, and the hundreds of other popular personalities are of the exclusivity of Max Glucksmann. Therefore, none of the important filmmakers can omit serving the public their favorite stories, and so, since all the good understand, they depend principally on Max Glucksmann, who at the present time firmly grasps the center without fear of the anti-dynasty revolution. On the other hand, the dynasty of the Glucksmanns that recognize Max as chief is rather extensive. 4 brothers that help him in the difficult chore to bring the reign of the government in such extensive dominions. In these pages we publish the photograph of Enrique, the general director, in whose hands the strings of the business, and that of Jacobo, the sub-director, who in certain moments substitutes for his 2 older brothers in the supreme authority. All of them have grown with the house, and all have collaborated with Max to its magnification. It is just since to dedicate to them the place which they correspond in this chronicle. When a particular business arrives at a height so grand by its strength of a man, 70 theaters in 2 countries, without the help of foreign capital nor support of no one class, it converts into something that honors the nation where it's found to reside, and in this sense Max Glucksmann is one worthy of our country, since it has been him, as continuing the work of Lepage, who has made what Buenos Aires might become the principal center of cinematography in South America. This was written by Leon de Aldecoa. And so I'm going to read the translations of the photo captions from pages 1 to 3. Don Enrique Lepage, I showed you him at the beginning of this talk, founder of Casa Lepage. Upper right, the home of film, the palace where the central house of Max Glucksmann is located at KLOE in Mitre Streets. Mr. Max Glucksmann, the one continuing the work of Lepage. Bottom left, first Casa Lepage in the Calle Boulevard, number 375, and the annex of the Avenida de Mayo with its entrance on Victoria Street. Translation of the photo captions of page 2 and 3 article. Don Enrique Glucksmann, General Director of Casa Lepage of Max Glucksmann. Mr. Jacobo Glucksmann, Sub-Director. The principal sales room in the central house on the Calle y Bartolome Mitre, whereas in the annexes, photography, records, phonographs, and the Koch brand of motion picture projector articles for the family are sold. Accounting department, special section for the sale of motion picture projectors. Translations of the photo captions for the last page of the 3-page article. The theaters of Max, the luxurious Palace Theater, Petit Palace on Plaza Libertad, the grandiose Electric Palace, the latest of the series, the popular Cine Opera. So I want to go back and show you the photos of what I just translated the captions of. So here's a picture of Enrique Lepage, who began the company in the 1890s. Here's the headquarters on Calle Callao and Bartolomé Mitre. There's Max Glucksmann. See the Casa Lepage front door. Here's the opening of the office on Avenida de Mayo. Next page we have Enrique Glucksmann, one of the brothers of Max Glucksmann. We have Jacobo Glucksmann. I think I earlier described that as being Enrique's office, but and then we have interior photo of the headquarters. So That's from the 1914 article in Caras y Caretas. Caras y Caretas was a weekly magazine that was from 1897 to about 1939. I have hundreds of issues of that with photos, articles that I've translated. Now I would like to read an interview by Silguer and Max Glucksmann published on Thursday, July 16, 1931. This is from the Atlantida magazine. I also have photos of Segovia in my book from that magazine. The first salary of Max Glucksmann, 50 pesos a month. At that time, the peso was about $1, so it was $50 a month. Who doesn't know his name? Adults and youngsters have become familiar throughout the years because there isn't a single person in the Republic of Argentina that isn't an aficionado of music, and if there is, that would be strange. Besides, everyone loves the cinema and music. At this time, they had sound films, but Casa La Paz started along with Max Glucksmann back in the Cine Mudo silent movie era. Cinema and music, the two activities he has dedicated 40 years of his life to. We found him in his home on Calle Florida. You worked a lot in that, Mr. Glucksmann. 40 years. I entered into the business as an employee of the ancient Casa La Paz and Company, located then on Calle Boulevard 375. That was dedicated to the branch of photography. My salary in that epoch was very modest, but my position was as an apprentice. Can you tell me how much? 50 pesos monthly. Everything was in relation to my salary. The location that Casa La Paz and Company occupied was, for example, 7 by 25 meters. So that would be roughly 21 feet by 75 feet. I worked a lot, and a little by little I was acquiring practice, better knowledge until today. Here's a picture from about 1931 of Max Glucksmann. We see on the following page that I've yet to read, a picture of him and his wife. When did you become independent, Mr. Glucksmann? In 1908, I was able to buy the Casa La Paz that had an annex on Avenida de Mayo. As well, it suffered from growing larger and had dedicated itself to the cinema since 1900. A lot of these videos are on YouTube. You also need to read some or watch some videos where people have done a thing on the complete life and immigration aspect from Germany that Max Glucksmann did. As well, it had employees added. When I started, there were only 3 employees. And when you bought the house, it already had 150. The phonograph and the cinema by Max Glucksmann. Very few people know more intimately than Max Glucksmann the life of the phonograph and the cinematography, from the first epoch in which the public got to know until now, in which the two have become an impeccable perfection. Max Glucksmann speaks. 40 years ago, he tells us, the first Lioret phonographs were imported from France. They were with celluloid cylinders. Then came the shellac cylinders. Around 1900, the phonographs with discs appeared, but they were faulty. That was the time when Caruso, Tamano, and other aces sang the lyric style. But truly, when the phonograph arrived in the Argentine Republic, it was thanks to the popularity that day by day the criollo music had achieved. Criollo being Argentine folk music. A lot of great guitar pieces were written to accompany that, as well as solos. I have a lot of the sheet music covers, 2 by 4 inches in my book, 4 to the page. Since that epoch when the payadors, Negro, Gazon, Gabino Aziza, Violdo, Gerardo Lopez, and Gobi sang. Payadors is singers, I would say folk singers of Argentine folk music. How it had perfected the disc. How did you record then? The technical perfection that we have today didn't exist. You had to sing disc after disc. That is to say, you didn't get a master take of the disc, and it was necessary to make them one by one. As the years passed, the popularity of the native music increased, not only in Argentina but in the whole world. Max Glucksmann was the first to install a factory of recordings in Argentina, thus as such the first that established the rights of the author. For me, it is a great satisfaction, he adds, to be able to say thanks to those artists such as Carlos Gardel, Jose Rosano, who also sang along with Carlos Gardel doing duets. Gardel and Rosano were at the top of every Max Glucksmann Discos Nacional full-page ad in Caras y Caretas magazine, and this was from 1919 roughly all the way to 1931-33. Every week, no other position, always on the top of the page. I have a complete printout of every week, so you figure 12, 13 years times 50, I have that many 6-inch stack of paper that I printed out. I also had maybe 280 or so original copies, but I acquired other information from Biblioteca Nacional de España from Madrid, online services that are just fabulous. Roberto Firpo, Francisco Canaro have earned real fortunes in my house, fortune and popularity because the discs have made their names known around the world. Thanks to the disc, for example, Canaro and Gardel have been collecting royalties from all parts. To hear Canaro the day when he debuted in a hotel in New York, he had to pay $60. For Gardel, by taking part in whatever Parisian festivity, he was paid 10,000 francs. Today, the cast of artists that record for Casa Glucksmann is not only more numerous, but perhaps the best artistic quality. And of the cinema, Mr. Glucksmann, what can you tell us? That is very long. In 1900, the cinematography really began with small apparatuses for aficionados. Its perfection initiated when it could be exploited commercially. From 1900 to 1910, the cinema began to popularize in an intensive form. Much of that is due to the Pathé brothers, who were the first to make films with scene locations, with recreations that had a great worth for the public. Among those films, I remember the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905, the coronation of Edward VII of England, the Anglo-Boer War, roughly 1899, as I recall, or 1904. I shouldn't speak about things I don't know. Sometimes I speak and I don't have a recall of what I call non-recently studied history. Presently, Max Glucksmann manages one of the most powerful houses in Argentina. His business in record sales and cinematography brings in extraordinary amounts of money. How many people do you employ? 1,500, including those in sales, recording, fabrication, printing, cinematography, a small republic, and annexes in Rosario, Santa Fe, Cordoba, Santa Fe, Montevideo, Santiago, Chile, stores in Paris, London, and New York. How many theaters do you have? 70. After 40 years of continued and enthusiastic labor, Max Glucksmann, the pioneer of the Criollo discs and cinematography in Buenos Aires, can't be very discontent with the award he obtained. I would like to thank www.tototango.com for listing of this important historical interview that was supplied to them by the contribution of Jorge Finkelman of the Universidad de Buenos Aires. He, much like myself, did an English translation from the original text in Spanish. His was not used, as I have my own resources, and the other one appeared to be done with a computer translator in some parts. It's possible that the people at www.tototango.com did the translation. There was no acknowledgement as to who did this. I have written at length about this to indicate I wasn't about to start plagiarizing now. This was one of the last things to be done to finish this book. I would especially like to thank Jorge Finkelman for finding such an important publication in the first place. His efforts have enriched our lives with the article to be found. I was reading today from pages, starting at page 1847, volume 3. In the Caras y Caretas magazines of July 23, 1927, issue number 1503, Año 30. The full-page advertisement mentions he will be buying and opening his own building soon. Some weeks later, this was fully realized and mentioned in September 3rd of 1927. Issue 1509, 6 weeks later, Anno 30. There are dozens of silent videos produced by him on YouTube, not to speak of hundreds of Discos Nacional Odeon recordings that he was responsible for creating with the greatest artist of Argentina that can be enjoyed. On the next page, here's, as I mentioned, I took some of this from Biblioteca Nacional de España, but I had over 280 issues of my own from originals. Those I bought about 2004. As I worked on the book, eventually I saw stuff on the internet, and I said, oh, I've had that original edition. Now these people are putting on something they got from Biblioteca Nacional de España from Madrid. So here's a picture of the huge multi-story, 8-story building at Florida, 336-44. Translation of Max Glucksmann building inauguration advertisement from the previous page that I just showed you, from the Caras y Caretas magazine of September 3rd, 1927, issue number 1509, Anno 30. The inauguration of our own building on Florida 336 to 344 that consists of 8 floors for exposition and sales of all classes of the best and the most famous brands of articles of photography, phonographs, records, cinematic apparatuses, and radio accessories. Our progressive capital will also consist from now with the endowed and establishment of the best photographic developing rooms, which are supplied with the most modern and perfect mechanical instruments capable of doing the delicate work, and with the amplest and magnificently equipped photographic gallery. Besides, we have installed listening booths luxuriously furnished to the end that to every person, lady or gentleman or child, many have the maximum comfort to be courteously attended. The Music House has decided to install luminous projection rooms that unite all the desired comfort and that provide all classes of apparatuses of projection. To complete this new phase of its firm and constant commercial development, the house, Max Glucksmann, Florida, number 336 to 344, thanks the public its frank and decided support and invites it to know the location where you will have the pleasure of putting to your entire disposition. In this opportunity and celebrating the happening that the inauguration of the new building indicates in its commercial life, the house Max Glucksmann offers a sensational surprise whose originality in this way, as well as the importance and the quality of benefit which represents for the public, will constitute an expressive demonstration of the sincerity with which the House desires to associate to the population of this significant moment of its prosperity that it must please the public. Max Glucksmann, Florida, 336 to 344. Annexes: Buenos Aires, Calles Callao and Bartolome Mitre, Rosario, Cordoba, 1065 to 1069, Montevideo, Uruguay, 18 de Julio, the 18th of July is the name of the street, 966, Cordoba, 9th of July of 76, Santa Fe, Salta, 2661. Look for the silent films of Max Glucksmann on YouTube. There are over a dozen of them.